Morning, everybody. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, thank you for this day that you have made, that we can rejoice and be glad in it. We ask that you give us your Holy Spirit today as we study your word. Lead us into all truth as you have promised. Watch over all our loved ones who need your healing hand and care and attend to their needs and give them strength for their struggles ahead. Lord, we remember the woman that Christine came upon today. It was in a bicycle accident. Cindy, we pray that you would watch over her and that her recovery that nothing serious has happened and that she is recovering quickly. All these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
We had a set of prayers about you, just didn't feel right.
Okay, so David and Saul just had an encounter in the stronghold of caves and things like that. We're in 1 Samuel chapter. 1 Samuel 25. We'll just recap the end of 24, and David had the chance to harm him again, but this time instead he just took his sword and the jug of water that was by his head. Is that the one we're on? Or is this the one that he cut off his robe? Oh yeah, he cut off the corner of his robe. Sorry, he'll do that. He'll do the spear and the jug of water. That's later. But nevertheless, so Saul walked out, and David called to him and said, "Hey, look what I could have done." And Saul realized what was going on and made David swear that when he became the king, which he saw was surely going to happen, that he wouldn't cut off his family and his offspring. That David wouldn't wipe out Saul's family when he became king. And David swore that to Saul. And who had David already sworn that promise to previously? To Jonathan. That's right. Jonathan had asked him the same thing, and David had promised that. So Saul went home, and David went back to the stronghold still to sort of hide out. And you notice he's not saying, well, if I'm going to be king, then I'm going to take it now. No. David continues to respect the fact that Saul is in the place of is the king, and David is not going to take it into his hand to remove him. David is going to continue to act defensively and not seek Saul out in order to kill him, and won't lay his hand on him. In fact, when he did lay his hand on him just to cut that robe off, how did David feel? When he even when he just cut the end of that robe off, his heart was struck within him. He felt remorse that he had even would lay his hand on the Lord's anointed even that much. Chapter 25. Now Samuel died. This little interlude with Samuel having passed away, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. So we have it's a lot of ringing. Okay, very good. So Samuel passed away. It's interesting that we have 1st and 2nd Samuel, but here, 7/8 of the way through 1 Samuel, Samuel is dead. Because it's really not the account of Samuel, it's the account of David, and not even really of Saul. It's really the rise of David and his life and things. So they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran, and there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 3,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. So, hey. Oh, welcome. He was shearing his sheep at Carmel, and the name of the man was Nabal, or Nabal. and the name of his wife was Abigail. Now, Nabal, I think his name means something like fool, or kind of dummy, or something like that. And so, whether he was named that before or after this event is probably something to be to be said, but or this is sort of what he was known as. This is like a nickname, probably not his birth name. Who would name their kid that or something like that? But he was very rich. He had lots of sheep, and the sheep shearing time apparently is a time of feasting and drinking and drunkenness and things like that as well. I mean, you're out there, you got everybody together, and everybody's kind of working together, and there's also a time for partying and stuff like that, I guess. So we got Nabal and Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. And he was a Calebite, so he's a descendant of Caleb, one of the spies that brought back a good report, but way back at the beginning of the Exodus stuff. Discerning and beautiful. I think the only other time the word for beautiful that's used there is in reference to Rebecca. I think that Jacob saw that she was beautiful. So it's kind of an interesting little note. But remember, God doesn't see with the eyes. He sees with other, he sees deeper than the eyes. But David is ruddy and handsome, and Abigail is discerning and beautiful. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, so David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name, and thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now, your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. They missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servant and to your son David." Kind of an interesting exchange here. So you've got, they're shearing all these sheep. He's got lots and lots of sheep, which means he's got a staff of shepherds as well. And here's David out in the wilderness, his band of guerrilla warfare guys, and they're hiding out and things like that, which could have been seen as a band of thieves. Are they scavenging off the land? And, you got the shepherds out there. They would be vulnerable to theft and to being attacked and things like that. It's one of the hazards of shepherding. You're isolated. You're out there in the wilderness and, things like that. But David sends his group of men to come find him and say, "Hey, 400, 600 of them? Hey, we've all been out here in the wilderness. We've seen your shepherds. And you know what? We didn't do anything to them."
We've been protected.
Well, two things. One, we didn't attack them. And two, we were kind of keeping an eye on things. So you're welcome. And Nabal is, did I ask you to watch over my guys? Maybe I got big tough guys. I don't know. But it's sort of a protection racket. Is almost kind of what it sounds like. A little bit of a shakedown. Hey, we're out here with your shepherds. We didn't take nothing from nobody. You just ask it. We didn't take nothing. Not yet. I think there's sort of an implication there that sort of says, hey, give us some food, give us something of your own free will, because we could have taken whatever we wanted, because we're an army, but we didn't. So give us a little bit of what you got on hand. Don't go out of your way too much. We don't want to put you out or anything, but whatever you got, it's a feast day. Let us see what you got there and things. It does seem a little bit like a protection racket. Yeah, it's kind of be a real shame. You got a nice flock there. It'd be a real shame if somebody sheared them. So David's young men came, and they said all this to Nabal in the name of David. And then they waited. Then Nabal answered David's servants. Who's David? Oh, boy. Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shearers and give it to men who come from I don't know where? So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. So, I mean, it's clearly an insult. I mean, one, Nabal definitely knows who David is. One, Saul killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. Everybody knows that song. Even the Philistines know that song, right? Isn't this David, the 10,000s and the thousands guy? And then he says, well, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? Okay, so that's also a clue that he knows which David this is in particular. So, but he is kind of saying, think of this as like when, like the two boxers are getting ready to fight and stuff, and they're just sort of, they're trash talking each other, and they're stuff, and they're just like, well, who are you? It's like, you're a nobody. And then he sort of says, hey, there's lots of people just breaking away from their masters, like suggesting that's what David is doing, that David is broken away from Saul and is kind of going out on his own to, maybe be a usurper and things like that. What, do I got to feed everybody that runs away? I don't know where they came from. I didn't ask them to come here. So it's definitely an affront and sort of an insult to David. Nabal thinking, I'm the big shot rich guy, and who do you think you are? Kind of a statement. So David's been telling this, and David says to his men, strap on your swords. And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, which is probably Goliath's sword still, so it's probably on his back because that thing was big. But David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. So you got 2/3 going up and 1/3 staying back with the camp. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. And yet the men were very good to us. We suffered no harm, and we didn't miss anything while we were in the fields as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us, both by day and by night, or by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. All right, so one of the servants goes to Abigail, one of Nabal's servants goes to Abigail and says, we got trouble because your husband, the fool, is playing a fool. And he roughed up David's guys, but they did take care of us and did protect us, and now he's badmouthed them, and and your husband's a worthless man. You can't even speak. You can't tell him anything. You can always tell Nabal, but you can't tell him much. So he's kind of living up to his name there, and he's like, look, they got a lot of guys and they're warriors. Something bad's going to happen to us, so you figure out what you should do. So Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey, she came down under the cover of the mountain. Behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. So she headed them off before they could get to her husband. Now David had said, surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed. He has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. It's like, all right, so just so you know, David is intending on going down and wiping these guys out. Which seems, a little out of character for David to be vengeful like this. You know, he really hasn't been vengeful like this when people spoke bad of him, or, you know, he always seems, he's always seemed to have gotten his way. But now somebody told him no, and he's kind of throwing a tantrum. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my lord regard this worthless fellow fool, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him." Look, his name is Fool, and he's foolish. How does she start the whole conversation?
By greeting him first.
Respects it, yeah, bows down, you know, out of reverence, but also, who does she? Yeah, she takes ownership of it. It's like, if you want to have somebody hear you out, it's like, no, don't blame him. It's my fault. And now David's got to be like, well, I got to hear it. You know, how the heck is this your fault? Now I got to listen to this at least. So she's at least sort of got the conversation in her direction. Your servant did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. So I didn't see the ones you sent. I missed it. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as Nabal. So it's like, anybody who wants to hurt you, let them be as foolish as my husband is, you know. Now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. This is kind of a extravagant blessing she's giving to him here, right? If men rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living, in the care of the Lord your God, like bound into like a quiver of arrows. You know, your destiny shall be tied to the living, not to the dead. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. Do you think she knows who she's talking to? You know, given a nice little analogy there, play on words about, you know, they'll be like a stone slung out of a sling, like you, the stone slinger, giant slayer, right? Yeah, she is very, very crafty and just like, and beautiful, by the way. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. So she's saying, look, you're going to be king, all these things are going to be great, and don't go down and kill Nabal and all these people, because they're not guilty of anything, and you don't want to shed innocent blood, because you're this great guy, and you know you're going to have this great kingdom and all these things, and when you become king, then you won't have any regrets, because you'll have not done this. So don't do this evil thing. Just let it pass. That because you haven't shed blood without cause or worked salvation for himself, you haven't taken vengeance into your own hands. Remember, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, right? So let the Lord handle it. And then when all these good things come to you, do me a favor, remember me. You know, remember how we stopped you from doing something that you would have regretted. You're going to regret this. Don't do it. She was a good wife, and you know what? Objectively, whether it was her husband or not, she's right. David would be guilty of murder. here. They didn't, I mean, just because he was bad-mouthing him doesn't mean that he deserved death. David was just angry. So David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me." So he even sees God's hand in intervening here. So, thanks be to God that he sent you to stop me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand, from getting my own vengeance. For surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried to come and meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice and granted your petition." So it's like, yep, I'm cool. Thanks for all the stuff. It looks like a great feast. I mean, that's a big feast, 5 sheep and lots of grapes and raisins and all sorts of stuff. I mean, they got a good feast. You got 600 people to feed, so I mean, it's a lot of people, but all right, so then Abigail comes back to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. He's totally oblivious. Just totally oblivious. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. And she told him nothing at all until the morning light. It's like, he's drunk, he's already hard to talk to, he's not going to be easy to talk to tonight, I just forget it. I'm not even going to deal with it. And just that's how foolish he is, that, I mean, he's not a king, he's a rich man, but he's throwing a feast like a king. And meanwhile, the king was ready to come and kill him. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him. And he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Yeah, so, something that, her telling him these things, stunned him. He was so taken aback by the thought that he was about to get wiped out and things. So he had just some sort of psychosomatic response to that he, had a, seizure or, who knows what, just stunned, And then 10 days later, something happened. The Lord struck Nabal somehow and he died, whether it was a heart attack or a stroke or, we don't, the Lord did this thing, and however it was that he accomplished it, he did. But, and notice it's, in the Old Testament, they don't, the Lord didn't cause this thing to happen, or the Lord didn't send somebody to do this thing. The Lord did it. Because, he is sovereign and he does do all things. So he does allow all things and controls all things. So the Old Testament is just more willing to talk about God being the direct cause. Sometimes we soften it as he's the indirect cause of things. But no, he struck Nabal down. Because he was full of wine and merry and foolish and all these sorts of things. This kind of reminds me of the rich fool with all his barns and stuff. He says, eat, drink, and be merry, because nothing wrong will happen to you. And then the Lord says, "You fool! Tomorrow your life, this very night your life is required of you. And then what will you have?" I wonder if as Jesus told that parable, if anybody thought back to Nabal being rich and having everything and not having a care in the world, and then the Lord comes that day and says, first, you were spared this night, and that struck him, and then 10 days later he does die. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." So there's something for us to keep in mind there too, is, we suffer much as Christians, or we suffer much at the hands of fools, of Nabals, and instead of trying to take the matter into our own hands and gain our own vengeance, we can say, you know what the Lord will handle this. The Lord will handle what is necessary. He might not strike your enemies dead, and the bullies or the whatevers. But, in the end, you will be vindicated because you'll be with the Lord, and unless they repent and are forgiven, then they won't be. So, well, then there's this. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hurried and rose, mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her, and she followed the messengers, and David became his wife. Or David added her to him, is the way that's said there. So, because he's kind of getting a collection of wives now, which doesn't always work out so great, as we're going to see, obviously, but it is what it is.
A lot of romance in their life. He doesn't even ask her personally. He sends a servant down to do that.
One commentator described it as, "Hey, you're late for the wedding." "What wedding?" "Yours." Like, oh, I should go then. But she's pretty wise and discerning, and maybe I think she looks ahead and says, being wife to David, it sounds like a pretty good deal, and probably all that was Nabal's is now David's, the many thousands of sheep and goats and all these kinds of things as well. So David is kind of, he continues to rise. What's that? Yeah. So by the way, David also took Anoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Galim. So he had been married to Michal, but when David split and Saul, was mad at Michal for tricking him and things, apparently he handed her off to another man, which is weird. I mean, there's really no precedent for that. David isn't dead and isn't divorced or anything like that, so that she could still be rightly called David's wife. You see any irony in that? The king takes David's wife away from him and just tries to kill him. You see any irony in that and what's going to be coming up here in 2 Samuel, where David is king and tries to take the wife of somebody and tries to kill him? There's a little bit of irony there, I think. He should have. He should have, for sure. All right. So we get this little interlude. So chapter 25, David, we get to see that he's human. He's got his failings. He could have acted out in vengeance, but vengeance remained with the Lord, and the Lord took care of things. And in fact, through what could have been something very bad, on the other side of it, David is enriched, and his wealth increases, and so does his position. So God takes something bad and turns it around to something good. Chapter 26, we've got Saul on the hunt again. The Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding himself in the hill of Halakah," which is this very specific place. And Saul rose and went to Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David. And he encamped on the hill of Halakah, which is beside the road east of Jezmon. But David was in the wilderness. And when he saw that Saul came out after him in the wilderness, David sent out spies, word that he had come. So we got this little cat and mouse game going on. Then David arose and went to the place where Saul had encamped, and David saw the place where Saul lay, with Abner the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment while the army was encamped around him. So you've got Saul at the center, and you've got everybody else encamped around him, kind of the protection. You put the king at the center, I guess, or whatever. When God told the people of Israel during their travels to set up camp. How was their camp arranged? Does anybody remember? Was that? Yep. The tabernacle of the Ark of the Covenant was in the center, and then the Levites, and then in the different quadrants around it were the other tribes. So now here you've got Saul at the center of their encampment. So it's sort of this, the displacement of God at the center to the king at the center was something that God had warned them of, and that, this is sort of emblematic of the shift that's happened in Saul's mind, as well as in his followers and things, that it's, the king is at the center, and we've lost track of who the true king really is. We're not he's out there to hunt and kill David when, yeah, right. Yeah, they're sort of asking for it, and they're losing track of what God had really established them for. So then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, "Who will go down with me into the camp of Saul?" Like the big camp with all the guys with the swords, and you want to go down there? Well, Abishai is apparently the Peter of the group. He speaks before thinking sometimes. He's very bold and brash. He says, "I'll go with you." Okay. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. Then Abishai said to David, "God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him into the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice." So kind of two things happening there. When they were in the back of the cave and Saul was in the front going to the bathroom, what did his men say to him? Kind of the same thing. "Look, the Lord has delivered your enemy into your hands. Let's kill him. Here's your chance." And now Abishai is saying, "Look, you don't even have to do it. I'll do it. I know you're worried about laying a hand on the Lord's anointed or whatever, but I got this. I'll do it." And how many strokes of the spear was it going to take him? Just one. Not Saul, Mr. Shank it to the right when I throw my spear. If Saul keeps missing with his spear, maybe that's sort of a known thing. But no, Abishai says, "No, I only need to hit him once. I'll pin him to the ground." But David said to Abishai, "Do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" Look, he's still the king, and if you kill the king, it's almost like even if you're justified in the moment, you still killed the king, and that's a problem before the Lord, I think. Yeah. So David still has this profound respect for Saul's office. He is still the king. He wants to kill me, I know, but he's still the king, and I'm not going to kill him. And what did David just learn about the ones who oppose him and do evil to him? Who's going to take care of it? The Lord will take care of it. Just like the fool, David's kind of convinced again and sort of like, look, I think God's going to take care of this for me. I'm not going to do it myself. I'm not going to put that blood on my hands. Yet. Because he has plenty of blood on his hands later on for bad reasons. But at this point, he still has this conscience that he's not going to, he's not murderous. And David said, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him. This on his day will come to, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish." Look, God will take care of it. The Lord will strike him, or his day will come, or he'll die in battle. And the Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let us go. Here's that other, here he is, sort of that counting coup thing again. It's like, look what I could have done, but I didn't. Again, just to show you, I'm not out to kill you. I could have, but I'm not going to do it again. Yeah. So he tells Abishai to go get the spear and the jug of water, but verse 12 then says, so David took the spear and the jug of water from Saul's head and went away. So it's kind of like, on second thought, I'll take care of this because I don't think I trust you because I think you're going to go ahead and pin him to the ground anyway. So I got this. So they get the jug of water and the spear, and no man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. So there is some divine intervention here as far as how could they have gotten through the whole camp and gotten up to him and had this conversation, and it's like, could somebody sneak into your bedroom and steal the glass of water from your bedstand, and I don't know, maybe your nightstand gun or I don't know what, and then sneak out there again. So the Lord had put a deep sleep that had fallen upon them. So apparently that's the same deep sleep that God gave to Abraham before giving him the promise of that when he was having the vision of that you're gonna have that your descendants will be very great. Apparently that's the deep sleep kind of thing too. So I don't think it's the same word as the deep sleep there. That's a good question. Then David went over to the other side and stood far off on top of the hill. We're going to put some space between us before I start gloating. And David called to the army and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, "Will you not answer, Abner?" And Abner answered, "Who are you who calls the king?" David said, "Are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king, your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die because you have not kept watch over your lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head." So he's kind of taunting Abner with saying, You're the king's bodyguard, and you fell asleep on the job. You let somebody come in and get right there and steal the spear and the jug of water. It could have killed the king, and you let him, and you slept all the way through it. I mean, you deserve to die because you've left him vulnerable. Saul recognized the voice, and is this your voice, my son David? And David said, "It is my voice, my lord, O king." And he said, "Why does my lord pursue after his servant? What have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, Go serve other gods. Now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains." So it's like, look, if I've done something against the Lord, and that's why you're out here to kill me, then so be it. But if you're here because other men have told you to come and get me, or because of the agenda of mankind, of a man, or you, then let me escape. Then that's not right. So, you know what? The Lord is going to take care of whatever it is. I mean, you're out here. He sort of puts himself small again. I'm just a little flea. I'm a flea on the dead dog's back. Remember that? Or you're hunting a partridge in the mountain. Both of which are hard to find. Fair enough, right? But then Saul said, "I have sinned." Oh, again. "Return my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake." David answered and said, "Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord. and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. And Saul said to David, Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. So again, we have another one of these interactions, very much like in the cave. David had the chance, and he didn't, and he calls to Saul, and Saul says, You're right, I was wrong, I shouldn't do this. And really, David is treating Saul the way that he wants the Lord to treat him. As your life was precious in my sight, may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord. Or maybe it's reversing that. Maybe it's because I know the Lord has been merciful to me, so I will be merciful to you. And deliver me out of all tribulation. And Saul, again, kind of comes to that realization, like, all right, that's fine. Yes, you're going to be very great. You're going to succeed, and just went each other's way. He didn't pursue him. He didn't chase him down. They're only one side of the mountain to the other, but he let him go. Okay, we're getting near the end of 1 Samuel here. Then David said in his heart, Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me longer with the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. He's like, all right, he's still going to keep coming after me. I know he said he's not, but he's got a track record. So I've got to do something. So I'm better off to go to the land of the Philistines, who hate him as much as, well, they kind of hate me, I guess. But so this is as good a chance as any. So David arose and went over, he and the 600 men who were there with him, to Achish, the son of Malch, king of Gath. So and David lived with Achish at Gath, he and his men, and every man with his household. And David with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. And when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. It's like, look, I'm not going to go and start an international incident just to go get David. He can stay in Gath. It's a little weird, though, that he's in Gath, right? Because who else was from Gath? Goliath had been from Gath. But we'll find this out a little bit here. So David is going to give Achish the idea that he has, because Saul has been after him and because Saul is trying to kill him, that David has turned sides. That David is like, look, yep, I know I did that, but you know what? Saul's after me, and so I'm on your side now. And Achish believes him. Not everybody believes him, but at least Achish does, because he's kind of foolish as well, and he's sort of, whether he's gullible or what he likes the idea of having this big band of soldiers that can protect him or what, I don't know. But so David said to Achish, if I found favor in your eyes, let a place be given me in one of the country towns that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? So that day Achish gave him Ziklag. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. And the number of the days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. So he's like, why should I be here? You're the king. Well, just let me have a little place out in the country. I'll get out of your way. I'll stay out of your hair. If you need me to do anything, you know where to find me. And so he gave him the town of Ziklag to maybe be like the governor or the viceroy or whatever you want to call it. Just sort of, yeah, you can have Ziklag and you and your men. And apparently that's been, that part of that belonged to the kings of Judah to the day that the person was writing this. So there you go. So for 1 year and 4 months, David is in Ziklag. Now David and his men went up and made raids against the Geshurites, the Gerizzites, and the Amalekites, For these were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as far as Shur to the land of Egypt. So remember, the Philistines are in the southwest corner of Israel, the promised land. And so he's able to go up into where the Amalekites are, and he's able to go down toward Egypt as well. And so they were making raids against these inhabitants. And David would strike the land and would leave neither man nor woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and come back to Achish. And Achish asked, "Where have you made a raid today?" And David would say, "Oh, against the Negev of Judah, or against the Negev of the Gemeralites, or the Negev of the Kenites." And David would leave neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath, thinking lest they should tell about us and say, "David has done this." So he's raiding the enemies of Israel, the ones that God had told them a long time ago to wipe out. But he's coming back and telling Achish that he's fighting against the Israelites. And David is wiping everybody out so nobody can come back and say, "No, he didn't wipe out, he didn't fight the Israelites, he's fighting against the Amalekites," or whoever it might be. So he's giving Achish the idea that he's fighting for the Philistines, but really he's doing things that would advance the cause of Israel ultimately by fighting against Israel's enemies, not against Israel. But he's not leaving anybody around to be able to tell the truth of the story. He's wiping them all out. And these are people who had been marked by God for destruction since they got to the promised land. So there's precedent for him to be making these raids and things like that. Kind of sneaky. A sneaky guy. So meanwhile, Achish is convinced, he's one of us now. And Achish, verse 12, and Achish trusted David, thinking, "He has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel. Therefore he shall always be my servant." Like, how he can't go back to Israel now. He's killed a bunch of his own men and his brothers and other Israelites and things like that. So he's one of us now. We got him. But that's not the case. David's already advancing his position as king of Israel. Pretty sneaky. Yeah? Oh, as you're reading that, sort of like, what is he getting at there? Yeah, it's just because the way it's written and things, you'd have to read that a few times to sort of like, what do they exactly mean there? Yeah. Yep. Which is good. That's why we have, why we get to hear the word and give the meaning as well. It's good to do. So now we have another time for the Philistines and the Israelites to go to battle. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for war against Israel, and Achish said to David, "Understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army." And David said to Achish, "Very well, you shall know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." So a couple things there. First, all right, so we're going to go fight the Israelites, and he tells David, Don't think you're getting out of this. You're coming with us to fight because you're a good fighter and all these kinds of things. So don't forget you're going to come with us for this. And David's a little coy with his response, isn't he? He's like, "I'll show you what I can do." Knowing the truth, you could take that two ways, right? It's like, I'll show you what I can do. It's like, I'm going to turn on you, or I'm going to make this to Israel's advantage instead, or it's like, he's a little coy with his response there. But Achish doesn't even see it. He's like, "I'll tell you what, I'll make you my bodyguard for life. I'm going to, bring you in even closer to me." It's like, are you sure that's a good idea? Yep. All right, so now this is probably another story that you're familiar with. So now Samuel had died, just a reminder, because that's important that Samuel is dead in the story we're about to tell. Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. That was a good thing. So all the fortune tellers and the pagans who had tried to divine the future through talking to the dead or interpreting the stars or the entrails of their sacrifices or whatever it was, Saul had put them out of the land because God had commanded him to. I mean, that was part of the law that mediums and necromancers should be killed. I mean, they should be under the threat of death. The Philistines assembled and came and camped at Shunam. And Saul gathered all Israel, and they camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, neither by dreams, or by the Urim, or by the prophets. So God has fallen silent to Saul. He's not going to tell him, should you go out and fight or not? He hasn't sent Saul a dream. He hasn't, the Urim and the Thummim, the casting of lots for the yes and no answers from the priest, not answering through that. No prophet is coming to talk to him. Samuel's died. Presumably somebody in the prophet's camp of Ramah God could raise up as a prophet, and we know Nathan will come and be that prophet for David. But there's no... God is silent to Saul right now. And instead of interpreting that as, probably shouldn't do anything since God is not telling me what I should do, probably shouldn't go to fight, Saul said to his servants, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And the servants said to him, behold, there is a medium at Endor. Little strange to have Saul, the one who put out all the necromancers and the mediums, ask his men, hey, give me a necromancer or a medium. Maybe even more strange is, well, we kind of know a guy, we know a lady. It's like, how do they know? It's like, well, because sin is in the land. They're still going to be falling into those sins too. So there's a medium at Endor. So there's the Witch of Endor. So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night, and he said, divine for me a spirit and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. The woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? They're like, necromancy? What do you mean necromancy? I don't know nothing about no necromancy. Saul is taking care of all those necromancers. I don't know what you're talking about. If you think I am, boy, that's got to be some kind of entrapment. That's going to be some kind of trick, But Saul swore to her by the Lord. As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. It's like, well, not yet. Not yet. What a weird thing. By Yahweh's name, I'm not going to kill you for disobeying God's law and bringing up the dead. It's like, Saul is just not with it anymore. The woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. He didn't want to see Samuel when he was alive. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. The woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, don't be afraid. What do you see? The woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. And he said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. So she doesn't exactly know what she's seeing, but she sees a spirit, or one like a god. So whether he has a glowing appearance or who knows what, but he's wrapped in a robe, and apparently that's a clue to Saul that that's Samuel, because I don't know, Samuel. Remember his birth, way back at the beginning, his mom would always bring him another robe every year. So apparently the robe thing was a Samuel thing. And so when there was a particular robe, a special robe of some sort, all right, so Saul knew it was Samuel. Yeah, go ahead. I think I know what the question is. Yes. Samuel is dead. And through her necromancy, through this interaction, she is seeing Samuel. So we need to talk about what she's actually seeing and who he is and what this all means. We'll get to that in just a minute. Let me get to the end of the story, and then we'll backtrack a little bit and talk about what did she see, who did she see, what really happened here, what is she actually capable of, and why did it happen this way? Because it's a little confusing. It's a weird story. This is one of those times in Scripture, it is weird. And it doesn't happen anywhere else. So we can allow it to be weird. It can just be weird. All right. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul answered, "I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I should do." And Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek." Remember that story? He was supposed to kill everybody, and he didn't. They kept the stuff, and the best of things, and he left Amalek alive. And he was like, well, no, they were going to sacrifice him. It's going to be the God that they did these things. And then Samuel hacked Amalek to death, into pieces and that kind of stuff. All right. So therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. All right. It's weird. So a couple different things. Some interpreters say this could not possibly be Samuel because you can't conjure up the dead, and a necromancer like this really has no power or no authority over the spirits of the dead, and so it can't possibly be Samuel. On the other hand, the way it's written here pretty clearly is Samuel. She didn't say she saw the appearance of Samuel or she saw a demon masquerading as Samuel. It says she saw Samuel, and then Samuel said, and why do you bother me, and all this different stuff. It's very first person from Samuel's perspective of things, which is strange. It's weird. It's kind of strange. So, the question being, was it really Samuel, or was it, something demonic in the form of Samuel and things? I think if you look at the way it's written and the way we read it, it seems that the Lord allowed Samuel to speak to Saul, to give him this final warning and this final declaration about what would be happening. I think that's what we kind of come to the conclusion of here. Somehow the Lord permitted this to happen, to be this case. We see in the account of the rich man and Lazarus probably the closest thing we could have to this. Jesus tells about the rich man and Lazarus, who the rich man feasts sumptuously every day, and Lazarus sits at his gate poor and his sores licked by dogs. The rich man dies and is buried, and Lazarus is carried by angels to Abraham's bosom, into heaven, and is in bliss. And the rich man is in torment in the flames, and he calls to Abraham and says, "Send Lazarus to give me a drop of cool water on my tongue. I'm in anguish." And Abraham says, "No, we can't do it. There's a great chasm." And then the rich man says, "Well, at least send Lazarus back to warn my brothers so that they don't end up, my family, so they don't end up here too." Like that whole, like send a spirit back to tell them about what's going on here. And Abraham says, "No, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, then they won't believe even if somebody comes back from the dead." Not saying, no, we can't do that, but they wouldn't believe him if we did send him. So there's sort of that window of, we could if we wanted to, but it's not going to do any good, so we're not going to. So that kind of like, okay, so could they if they wanted to? Samuel, if God wanted to, here's Samuel. Maybe. I mean, it seems to be a possibility. And, this is all very first person from Samuel's perspective. And so in his language and things like that. And it's very consistent with all the proclamations that Samuel had given previously to Saul about the kingdom and why and what's going to happen, and it's going to be given to David. So everything that he says here is already consistent with the proclamations of Samuel. He's not contradicting the word he has already proclaimed. Verse 19 is also interesting. So the Lord will give Israel with you into the hands of the Philistines. So you're going to lose the battle. The Lord is going to let you lose the battle. And you and your sons shall be with me. So it sounds like tomorrow, during the battle, Saul, you're going to die, and your sons are going to die, and you're going to be with me. This is very interesting. Because there is plenty of, there's always debate about notorious characters in the Bible, about what is their eternal place. And here we have Samuel say, you and your sons are going to be with me. And we got to think about, well, so what does that mean? It means, for example, Jonathan is going to die and is going to be with Samuel. Well, Jonathan doesn't have the blood guilt that Saul has, certainly. Jonathan has always been portrayed and presented as very stand-up and no idolatry, nothing to suggest otherwise from that. So we have no reason to suggest that Jonathan would be going to hell, or that Samuel's in hell. We don't have anything to suggest that, nor even to consider it just being this concept of the place of the dead, sort of between death and the resurrection at the last day, or anything like that, Sheol or whatever you want to call it. It just seems to be, your sons are going to die and you're going to be with me tomorrow. Like, so where Jonathan is, that's where Saul's going to be, and where Samuel is going to be. There is some suggestion then that Saul, for all his failings, for all his rebellion against God, for not executing the judgment against Amalek, or whatever those things are, he did have these times where he did the right thing against the necromancers and the mediums. He did lots of things consistent with having faith in the one true God, even as he did many things that consistent with him being a sinner. Okay, can you be a sinner and have faith in the one true God? Sure you can. It describes each and every one of us. That's for sure. So, this final proclamation of the law to Saul, is that what finally sears his conscience to or seals his conscience to be faithful to God and what's going to happen, or, I don't know. But we have this word from Samuel saying, you're going to die tomorrow, and in your death, you're going to come to be where I am. And that's kind of an interesting thing. It seems to suggest that Saul is going to be in heaven. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. That's the next day. Yeah, spoiler alert. Well, Samuel already gave it away. They're going to die. So just realize that when you read this passage, it can be perplexing. There's a lot in here that can sort of go one way or another, and ultimately we'll know in the end. When we're with the Lord, we'll know for sure what ends up transpiring here. But I think what we have here is that somebody who lived his life on this as sinner and saint and failing and being redeemed all through his life is kind of all of our lives as well. There's something to that. So when Saul heard this word, verse 20, then Saul fell at once full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. He's got that weird thing about when you go to battle, don't eat anything. Remember that vow that he made them all take? Don't eat anything when you go into battle. He didn't get that right. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, behold, your servant has obeyed you. I've taken my life in my hand and have listened to what you have had said to me. Now, therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you and eat, that you can have strength when you go on your way. He refused, I will not eat. But his servants, together with the woman, urged him, and he listened to their words. He got up from the earth, sat on the bed. And the woman had a fattened calf in the house, and she quickly killed it, and took flour and kneaded it, and baked bread, and put it before Saul and the servants. They ate, they rose, and they went away. So he's dumbfounded and struck by this proclamation. He's not going to eat anything, and she's like, let me feed you. You got to eat something before you go. And they finally do. She convinces them finally, yes, eat something. So they do. So now the battle. We'll get to the end. We'll get it. So all the Philistines gathered on their camps at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands. And David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. The commanders of the Philistines said, what are these Hebrews doing here? So they're getting ready to fight the Hebrews, the Israelites, and they're like, Achish, who you got with you? And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? Well, a year and 4 months. And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. The commanders of the Philistines said to him, send the man back, that he may return to the place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to the battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is not this David, whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck his thousands and David his tens thousands. It's like, look, no, send him away. He's going to turn during the battle. And the only way, what better way for him to get back in good with Saul than to turn on us and hand us over to him with our heads? Then Achish called David and said, as the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign. For I have found nothing wrong in you from this day to your coming to this day. Nevertheless, the Lord don't approve of you. So go back, go peaceably, that you may not displease the Lord of the Philistines. And David says to Achish, what have I done? He's still trying to play it on like he's disappointed. What do you mean I can't fight? What have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? It's like, what makes you think I'm going to turn on you? Achish answered David and said, I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. I don't know, Achan is just, he's not so bright. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said he won't go up. So rise early in the morning with the servants who came with you, depart. And so he set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. The Philistines went up to Jezreel. All right. So David is not going to fight against the Israelites. David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, and the Amalekites made a raid against the Negev and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went on their way. When David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So while he's been away preparing for this battle, apparently he didn't leave anybody behind this time, and the Amalekites saw it as an opportunity, and they sacked Ziklag and took everybody out. Not as an act of mercy, but as an act of slavery. They're going to enslave them, and the whole raping and pillaging and all this kind of stuff. This is a violent capturing of the women and the children and everybody that's been left there. So that's David and his band of men. They're lamenting this. They're mourning this, and so they're so angry with David they want to stone him. But David turns to the Lord for strength when he's kind of feeling responsible for this too. You know, he strengthened himself in the Lord because he also was mourning and weeping, and I think there's some extent that says, you know, that I caused this. So David said to Abinadab the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. He brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord, with the Urim and Thummim, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? God answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue. So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook of Besor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook at Besor. So they've already been hiking and camping, you know, coming up from the battle, and now they're in the pursuit, and they've been weeping and lamenting, and there's 200 men who are just too tired to go on. So he leaves the 200 there, and the 400 who have strength carry on. The 200 become important later. So the 400 go on. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. Maybe he's a spy, you know, something like that, right? Gave him water to drink, and they gave him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread nor drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, to whom do you belong, and where are you from? And he said, I'm a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We had made a raid against the Negev of the Cherethites, and against that which belongs to Judah, and against the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. Okay, all right, so we got the right crew. And David said to him, will you take me down to this band? And he said, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band. So this Egyptian had been captured by the Amalekites, was enslaved to the Amalekites, and he got sick as they were leaving the raid, and so they ditched him, left him to die. David finds him, feeds him, revives him. He's happy about that, and he's like, so what's been going on? Tells him the exact story. He's like, okay, we got the right group of raiders. Will you take me to him? And he's like, yeah, I'll take you to him, but don't turn me over. I don't want to go back to them. Deal. When they had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. They were reveling in the spoils of war. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped. Well, except 400 men who mounted camels and fled. So how many of them had to be there for them to be able to say, nobody has survived? Well, 400 survived. Like it's a minuscule amount. Like, they're just like a rounding error of 400 who took off on camels. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. So that which had been plundered and taken was fully restored. Pretty cool. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, this is David's spoil. So it's like what the Amalekites and everybody already had even, they added to them. So all was restored and then more. So they had extra spoils of war this time. So good victory. David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David and who had been left at the brook of Besor. And they went out to meet David and meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart. Hey, they didn't fight with us. They don't get any of the goods. They can have their people back, but we're keeping everything else. They didn't fight with us. But David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. So they saw it as what they had captured, but David identified the victory with the Lord, what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into the battle, so shall his share who stays by the baggage. Look, they're just as important as the ones who go out and fight. If they didn't stay back here, then, how could we have gone forward? They shall share alike. And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. If the army wins, and you're in the army, you get the spoils. Whether you were on the front lines or whether you were rear echelon, you get it. You get to share in the battle, in the spoils of the war. When David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. It was for those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negev, in Jatir, in Arar, in all these different places, in these cities, and all the places where David and his men had roamed. So all these places that they had been kind of traveling around in and hiding out in, things like that, he sent presents to them, kind of saying, thanks. We've been, we know we've been around. You didn't mess with us. You didn't hand us over. You didn't turn us in. So here's some spoils because we're grateful. Getting them kind of a good thing. And David knows he's going to be king, right? So you got to kind of get things ready for the day that you are actually going to be king. All right. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Maybe it's that whole sense like what David had of, I'm not going to lay my hands on the anointed of the Lord, right? Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, with his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. All right. So, yes, Saul is mortally wounded by the arrows, and he does fall on his own sword in an act of suicide, if you will. He was probably also already as good as dead, sounds like, from the archers and the arrows and things. So just as Samuel had said, so Saul and his 3 sons died the next day, and they are where Samuel is, however you want to interpret that. In spite of, the final play on how it all plays out, that's what Samuel said was going to happen, and that's how it came about. So they were routed greatly, and we know how Saul died, because how he died is going to come up important later on, because there's going to be somebody coming up later on saying that he knows how Saul died, and he knows it's a lie. David knows it's a lie, so we'll figure that out. That comes up later on. So finally, the pursuit of Saul after David is ended. Saul has finally died, and sadly also so has Jonathan and the other sons. But particularly sad is that Jonathan would die as well.
He had 3 sons.
Probably more than that. He had all the other wives and things like that, but these were his, maybe the firstborns or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, these were the ones that we had met at various times, and yep. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Asheroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. Well, when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night on the bodies of his sons from the wall at Beth-shan, and they came to Jabesh and buried them there. Burned them there. So the Philistines are making a spectacle out of Saul and his sons, sort of a way of showing, that they've won the great victory and gloating over it. And just as Saul had predicted, these uncircumcised are going to treat him shamefully. Even in death, they treat his body shamefully by beheading him and stripping him naked. And they put his armor into their temple, sort of showing, because they would have seen the king as the embodiment of the deity of that people, and so by killing the king, they can add the power of that deity to their pantheon of other deities, and so by bringing the armor in there, they sort of add Saul's god to their own, because they've conquered Saul's god, is how they would have perceived that. They nailed him to the walls, but then the valiant men of Jabesh Gilead brought him down, and they burned the bodies, and then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So what we have here is I mean, it's already been a number of days that the bodies, since they died, the bodies were not going to be in good condition and things. So to burn the bodies was to find a respectable way to handle the remains that would not leave them susceptible to disease, the people who were carrying them and things to disease. They were already being desecrated. They wanted to end the desecrations. So by burning the bodies, that wasn't to desecrate the bodies by cremation, as had been previously sort of indicated, that bodies burned in fire were desecrated or something. But I think this is more of a merciful act to say we need to end their desecrations by the Philistines if they capture them again or something like that. So we're gonna burn the bodies there, keeping in mind that when you burn a body, the bones don't burn up. And so, yes, they had the ash from the soft tissues, but the bones were still intact. The fire doesn't destroy those. So they gather the bones up and they bury all the remains under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh. And then they fast for 7 days out of mourning, but then also partially that's out of the cleanliness rites. If you've handled a dead body, you're unclean for a period of time as well. But it's also a period of mourning that they're extending here as well. So that's something to keep in mind when you talk about cremation. The burning does not turn everything into ash. Teeth and bones and things like that don't get turned to ash. They're put through a pulverizer then, and everything is crushed at that point, and then so that's all the same consistency. So when you think about cremation, keep that in mind as well. If that's the way you want your body handled or not, it's up to you. But just keep that in mind. So they burned the bodies, but then they had still something to do with the bones, so they buried them, which is appropriate. That's how they would handle those bodies. So.
My notes mentioned that David later had their remains removed from Jabesh and placed in the family burial grounds at Ziklag in Benjamin.
Yes. Yeah, we get that info later on, that David is going to act very honorably toward Saul and his sons and his remaining household of Jonathan and the rest. He's going to act very honorably toward them. Even one who's going to show up sort of bragging that he had killed Saul. David is not going to take kindly to that. It's like he doesn't want anyone gloating over the fact that Saul is dead. He mourns the fact that Saul is dead because, again, that's been consistent through this whole thing. No matter how evil or nasty Saul had become to him, he never wanted to be the agent of death for Saul. He never wished that Saul would die. He would just say, the Lord's going to handle it as he sees fit, and you would always see something sad about that as well. That shows integrity. I think that shows, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you kind of attitude that Christians can have, knowing that the Lord is on our side. So let the Lord be the one that takes vengeance. And so David sings Saul's praises after his death. We'll look at this next week when we get into 2 Samuel here. How he mourns and how he praises Saul and how he treats his burial respectfully and things like that. So, yeah, very interesting. David shows a lot of integrity there. I think that's the heart of David that is really his true character, and that we see the things that he does with Uriah and Bathsheba and stuff is sort of his being out of character and how he repents of that, coming back into character, which I think is good.
It seems to me that all that transpired after, in chapter 28, Saul sought the Lord's advice, and the Lord did not speak to him. So he goes out and gets a fortune teller, a medium, whatever you want to call it, and then he kind of reacts, and all this transpires then after he speaks to some medium. It's not of the Lord. It's not. It's the way I understand it is that all this stuff didn't happen because the decided that this is the way it was going to go down. It was the fact that Saul didn't have the word of the Lord to guide him. Didn't have the advice to guide him. So he goes by what this medium says.
Yeah,
All this stuff happens because of the action that he takes after listening to some fortune teller.
yeah. The silence of God is judgment against Saul. His death is judgment against Saul. Yeah, it definitely is. That fact that he is getting his kingdom torn from him. These are all, this is all law, judgment against Saul. Yeah, for sure. Yep. All right, we will pick up in 2 Samuel then next week. Once we get through 2 Samuel, you've got Kings and Chronicles, which gets a little more. It gets a little more complicated now because they're not sequential so much as they are different accounts of some of the same things, and so I've got to kind of decide how we're going to handle some of these parallel accounts of things. So we'll work through it though. We'll get through it. Yes, we have class next week. It's 2 weeks from now that we do not. So we'll see you next week.